Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today's review is Alex Garland's new movie, Civil War. Taking place in the near future, America has fallen into a brutal civil war, with numerous states succeeding for various different reasons, and it focuses on 4 different journalists who all grouped together to go from New York to Washington DC before the Western forces close in on the White House to essentially terminate the president. The film's director, Alex Garland, who originally started off as an author with films like novels like The Beach, which was adapted to a film directed by Danny Boyle and starring Leonardo DiCaprio, and also other books like Tesseract as well, and Coma from 2004. But he has since moved on to writing films like 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later, famous zombie films from here in the UK, and as well as Sunshine and Dread. Then he really became of his own as a director with his directorial debut, Ex Machina, which came out in 2015, which goes to show that he's only one film has already made his mark in sci-fi lore as one of the, not just one of the best sci-fi films of the decade, but also one of the best directorial debuts of the decade. Then he followed it up with Annihilation, which was on Netflix where I live in the UK, which is an outstanding movie and very creepy and definitely very atmospheric, which is from the same, which is adapted from a book which is more focused around world building, but again, the changes that were made were also pretty beneficial to the world of Annihilation as well. Then comes 2022 with Men, which unfortunately did not do as critically or commercially as well as his other 2 films, so anticipation with Civil War was pretty much sky high given the concept of a civil war that takes place probably a couple of years from now. And of course it did start with a lot of discussion online, particularly this movie being released in the election year, and of course the already incredibly turbulent political environment that was America. So let's see how Alex Garland treats an already pretty delicate situation that is the politics in America and the possibility of a second civil war. And the characters in the movie are very interesting. We have Kirsten Dunst playing Lee Smith, who is basically a war photographer based out in Colorado, who's based off Lee Miller, who is a World War II photographer, very famous, and there's Wagner Miller, who plays Joel, who's another journalist who teams up with Lee Smith. And there's also Kelly Spency, who you may know from the Priscilla movie, who plays Jesse, a new up-and-coming photography colleague who tags along with Joel and Lee to essentially document the civil war that's going down. And there's Stephen Mackenzie Henderson, a very underrated actor who plays Sammy, who's the most experienced out of all of them. He's a journalist for the New York Times and also the mentor of Lee Smith. And to round things off, we have Nick Offerman, who plays the President of the United States, who pretty much rules America with an iron fist and has a very unorthodox 3rd term in presidency, which his efforts including like abolishing the FBI and willing to welcome back the Western forces if their successionist governments would completely surrender or get assassinated. And you only get to see him at the beginning of the film and at the end of the film. I don't want to give away what happens at the end. And you only hear from him through like radio statements and news pressings, which almost builds up a mystique around the presidency, as you don't hear about what his family is up to, what most of his colleagues are doing. You only see what his troops are doing, which again builds up a massive amount of mystique around him. Even though the movie has gone, like I said earlier, some controversy, particularly around its political themes. Even though the director has defended the movie as deeply apolitical, but people like myself had the sense that the movie is about the current political situation in America and how extremely turbulent it is, particularly after the Trump presidency, and now he's essentially the Republican nominee for the upcoming election, and so is Joe Biden, so basically a rerun from the last one. But also, like myself, I got a sense this movie was a January 6th allegory, you know, when pro-Trump supporters stormed the Capitol because they couldn't deal with the fact they've lost the election. I think this is kind of that sense as well, but however, the movie is pretty apolitical, outside of a reference of an Antifa massacre that happened that happened before the movie, which thankfully hasn't happened yet, which would be incredibly shocking, but surprisingly the movie takes a very middle-of-the-road approach about where the movie does politically stand and where all the characters stand. Like, I don't even know in the President movie, is either a Democrat or Republican, is that apolitical, like, even though he abolished the FBI, like, because it's either due to Black Lives Matter or how they've treated Donald Trump. Like, I feel like it's kind of bipartisan. The movie is also a road trip film. So basically, they go from New York to Washington by car because air travel in a Civil War country is pretty much non-existent at that point. Like, basically the entire country is a no-fly zone. Along the way, they go to a gas station with looters being hung from a car wash place. And they meet up with the soldiers burying a mass grave, which is, in my opinion, one of the most intense scenes I have seen in a very, very long time. And of course, going into a nice little Quincy rural town where everything looks normal, streets are empty, but on top of the buildings there are usually gunmen just looking over all the civilians, and they usually bump into some American forces and some Western forces as well. And the action scenes are really are less like an adrenaline rush excitement, and more just really grounded and really intense. In my opinion, like a lot of these scenes are so intense that it honestly made me feel really uncomfortable at best. Like, my mum picked me up from the cinema because I was watching a really late screening of it. And I had difficulties talking to my mum about this movie because I was like still processing like how really intimidating and how really like overpowering the intensity of the situation of the characters we're in, like how really potent it gets, like the sheer overpowering intensity of the film. And the film's cinematography is particularly incredible at best. Like, there are a couple of instances of like some really good cinematography, like when the film starts off in New York and you do see like rows and rows of empty streets and empty avenues as it's being cornered by the military, and also when they're ended up in a refugee compound or a migrant camp, and it looks like it's based from an abandoned university, and it's all set in their in-house stadium. And how they shot that is incredible in my opinion, and how they designed the sets as it's now just completely covered in graffiti and the university is completely abandoned at that point. And also another moment of brilliant cinematography is when they drive through an active forest fire, and you do see like all the fires like literally raging around them, and all the burned down leaves that literally sprinkle around the car they're in like fireflies. And also, it's just a really gorgeously shot scene in my opinion. And the music as well, who you may know the composer Jeff Borrow from the Portishead album Dummy, which is a brilliant vibey album, who's also the composer of this movie and all Alex Garland's movies. And with that, and I'm finally getting around to listening to this album, like, you do listen to a lot of his fingerprints in this film as well. Like, it's more of a vibey, trippy, and experimental in a couple of instances, and sometimes a little bit more industrial. Like, the album does feel both trippy and experimental. Like, it kind of goes in that pendulum a little bit, which is again something I really appreciate from that soundtrack and other soundtracks, most notably Annihilation, which I think actually became a TikTok meme. The Alien as well. I think it's also based on like a Moderat song, I think. But again, he does some brilliant music. Even though the movie deliberately doesn't answer some questions like where does the president stand and what ideology started the Civil War, what officially started the Civil War, and what ideologies were the Western forces and the American army. Which, again, it's a bit of a safe road to go to, but knowing the tumultuous state that a political situation is at the United States at the moment, I feel like it may be clicking and kicking too close to home for a lot of the American audiences. But however, there are some questions which I wish got answers for, but however, it's either skimmed them over or never looked at all. Like, how did the Native Americans react to the war, and did they take sides? And did the Democrats and Republican parties have their own paramilitary systems like Northern Ireland does? How did other countries react to the said civil war, like their friends like Ukraine, Israel, South Korea, and their enemies like Russia, North Korea, and Iran? How they reacted to the civil war? What was the migrant crisis like? Like, did they go to Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean, Cuba, and we already hear a little bit of that question because the two main characters said their parents live in a farm in their respective states. And also, after the Civil War, there's going to be a power struggle between the Western forces and the US government. Like, who gets in charge, and do they succeed into the US government, or do they succeed into the Western forces? And how do the past presidents react to this as well? And do they take sides in who, in the Western forces, or the American army? And foreign aid, like, how much foreign aid is going to be willingly be given to the United States, and how much countries are going to take? Like, I feel like, again, this is essentially this Apocalypse Now-esque story about 4 journalists on a road trip, but I feel like all these questions should have really been asked and should have been a little bit more into consideration at that point, but I'm kind knew what to expect, as it's about these 4 journalists trying to get to the president before the Western forces do. Alex Garland's Civil War, whether you enjoy it or not, will be deeply intertwined of how you comprehend the current political state of America and how you personally feel about the election that's coming up this November. Regardless if you enjoy it or not, the movie is incredibly well acted, although direction and writing wise does raise some questions here and there, but the movie is beautifully scored, beautifully shot, and definitely some great narrative set pieces here and there, but the movie is also maybe hitting a little too close to home for a lot of people in America, considering, again, like I said a billion times in this movie, about the state America is in right now and the possibility of a second civil war. But I definitely do appreciate the movie, how it delivered its ideas, and how we should take not for granted the importance of journalism, particularly how they deal with wars, not just here, not just possibly in America, but also what's happening in something like Ukraine or Yemen or Israel, Gaza. Like, I feel like this is a movie about not just what would America become, but also a warning of what America might become if it does follow down that road. So for Civil War, I'm feeling a 7 out of 10. So, what do you think of Civil War? Let me know in the comments down below, subscribe to my channel, like this video, follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Letterboxd, and this is Elijah Wells, and bye!